Good, go. Sweet. So first things first, let's talk about the assignments. I went ahead and just uploaded it on Canvas instead of going the full printing route today. Couldn't make it to the copy machine anyway. So let's go ahead and get project 3, number 2. And of course, we have exercise 2, right? Titled Song and Instrument Diagram. If you would like your copy, of course, it's under assignments in Canvas, right? And you're welcome to read along with us. But obviously, we're looking at the objective versus the subjective, right? And as I've already coined, basically, we're going to make one diagram about the sound clip and 3 diagrams for the instrument itself, right? So now that a generative characteristic has been chosen about your piece of music and an essential feature of your instrument has been realized, we can dive further into the investigation of revisualization, or what is known as abstraction. Using the overlay method from our previous projects, we can dissect a grid, words, and expressions from the very measurement of amplitude within our sound clips. Refer to obviously the tutorial right now in Audacity. So you may find ways of diagramming the sheet music itself as well, right? And of course are not limited. Some of you guys could find the sheet music, some of you guys can't find the sheet music, so obviously an open interpretation of a tutorial. 2 separate diagrams, as I've stressed enough, will be made. The first from the piece of music and the second from the instrument, each exposing the inner proportions and characteristics of your instrument and sound clip. A grid should come from the amplitude visual or your sheet music, in which a particular motif is found through the proportioning of lines and syncopated rhythms. For instance, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. Not only does it have sheet music, right, but there's a particular rhythm of lines that would also express, right? 2 short lines, 1 line, long line, right? Dun 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 dun, right? It can be visualized as actually geometry. Anyway, the second diagram, of course, you guys all know because we just did a charrette, will be the artistic representation of the instrument. Each diagram will have its basic principles and communicated in point, line, and plane. Let these be influenced by the inner workings, materials, sound, or character of the instrument, right? Of course, the requirements, as you guys know, 1 diagram for what we're about to do in Photoshop today and Audacity, and 3 of not Photoshopped, all analog of what you guys just did in Studio, right? So the abstract diagram of the instrument. Now, you'll notice a little key. Some of you guys may have a particularly long instrument. For instance, I can think of the saxophone, the flute. Gosh, you know, there's quite a few that could be considered long. So what I would say, if you're not digging the 12 by 12, you're more than welcome to choose a 12 by 18. However, that does mean more, and eventually more model to build. But I'll let that be up to you. If 12 by 12 is just fine and you would rather those limitations, by all means, keep those limitations. Obviously, I think the French horn would fit the 12 by 12, and a lot of the other instruments, the organ doesn't necessarily need to be on a 12 by 18. But again, if your instrument lends itself to a bigger proportion, you're more than welcome to change that from a 12 by 12 to a 12 by 18. Obviously, the grading will be 50% abstraction, 25% craft, and 25% basically the research-driven drawings. You can disregard that. Not sure why that's actually on there. Maybe I didn't get rid of it. Either way. We'll actually choke this up to abstraction 50% and craft 50% because they will require your utmost drafting ability for the instruments and your craft and technology and printing, such as, how well you handle digital tools. So we'll digress from there. Anyway, so let's talk about the sound diagram that we need to make. So one of the first things that we can use and install is called Audacity, right? And I bring up some of these diagrams because essentially we're not going to make this per se, right? Not just like a word diagram. Ray, can you pick the louder chair? Sorry, my facetiousness, but it was just going and going.
I know.
Anyway, I know it's not your fault. You didn't make that chair. Anyway, I bring you this diagram just to kind of show you what we could possibly do with this. Now, in this case, this is more of a diagram that is basically expanding on some of the hierarchy of maybe some of the important parts of an organization, right? Obviously, SMO being quite the largest is possibly also the most important. Secondly, social is maybe second important, optimization, media, search, so on and so forth. Now, I don't want you guys to, of course, make a 30-word diagram, but again, maybe possibly inspiration for what I'll be asking you to do today, right? And of course, I always just like Pinterest because, let's face it, you can do a lot and see a lot and be inspired by a lot. However, it doesn't mean you have to copy them. Anyway, so, just food for thought. But if you search in Audacity, you'll find a free download for just about any program that you need. So whether it's Windows or Macintosh or even Linux, you can use this program. The next thing that we'll need is YouTube to MP3. Now usually I just type in YouTube to MP3 converter, and let's face it, I type it in at DuckDuckGo, so it definitely does give me different results than if I go to Google and type in YouTube to MP3. Clearly different results. I just like the ones I think on DuckDuckGo a little bit better. So we'll go ahead and click one of those. I'll take quite literally my YouTube video of my song and generate the MP3 for it, right? That way that I can put it on Audacity. Obviously, in showing you Audacity, you do have to install it. And again, it is free, so not a big deal. But let's go ahead and go to YouTube to MP3 converter. However, on the school Wi-Fi, let's face it, it might have some of these blocked. Not that they're illegal, but it's definitely frowned upon. So let's go ahead and take a piece of music. I'm going to use Walk, Don't Run. It's amazing how many things come up with that. Herb Alpert. So say this was my piece of music. Sounds wonderful. I'll take that URL and paste it. Convert. Still loading. Well, while that loads, let's go ahead and open up Audacity. Looks a lot like this. Auto updating, that's fine. Continue and OK. So this is kind of our base platform in terms of its UI. And really all we need for it is so that we can produce a wave image, right, for this file. Looks like it found it. I can go ahead and download it. And we'll save it to the desktop. And it looks like it's done. So I can either drag and drop it in here, or I believe I can actually file open it as well. So open, desktop, and we'll take that MP3. So this is essentially what we get, a WAV file of our music, right? Now, interesting enough, does anybody know what this is actually representing? Why are there two? Thank you. Yeah, so one's actually the left ear and one's actually the right ear, right? Interesting enough, you should see pivotal moments where you'll notice some differences, right? Clearly, there's something at this part Obviously we can't hear because maybe I don't have the right things going. MacBook speakers. Anyway, it's not important that I hear it. But what is important is what I get out of it, right? So for instance, I may need to actually listen to it and realize that some interesting anomalies happen at certain components. However, some of you guys have 15-minute long songs and you may need to actually just find your section. Now, you probably can't see this so much in the projector, but I did just highlight a particular section. So in my case, I might need to actually refine the recording and, delete some first, then zoom in and reevaluate. So there's my clip. And now I have something a little bit more specific to look at. Anyway, after we take this, let's go ahead and screenshot it. So in my case on the Mac, it's Command-Shift-4, and I can go ahead and make a copy of it. So the hardest thing about this diagram is understanding just how far I should really take this. Now, don't get me wrong, I could easily print out this. And, if you find it more comfortable just tracing on it and finding out for yourself how you can diagram or abstract something out of this, by all means, please print it out and literally draw lines on top of it. There is no requirement for this next part to be done entirely out of Photoshop. But I wanted to record it and address it anyway, just in case that's the avenue that you wanted to take. So in my case, I have a screenshot, and again, I can either print it out and do this all analog, or leave it in the computer and try it out in Photoshop, right? So let's go ahead and open up Photoshop and see what we can do. So I'll go ahead and start with a new. It does need to eventually be a 12 by 12 or a 12 by 18. So I think in my case, it's already kind of a long diagram. I'm going to go with a 12 by 18. I'm going to go with a 300 resolution so I don't burn up my computer today. And we're good to go. I can go ahead and place that image. So File, Import or Place. In our case, I believe it's Place Embedded. Yep. Take our screenshot and apply it, right? There's a couple of things we could do to this. We could really stretch it out. Mostly because I don't want to change the proportions of some of the things about the clip. Now, what's interesting is that all the waves that are happening, it's really just based on the amplitude of the song, right? So the frequency, the amplitude, and a few other variables are kind of basically condensed into this, essentially giving us quite literally the wave format of what's happening. So if we zoom in, like literally, it's a wave, right? Don't get me wrong, this is literally a millisecond, but interesting enough, that is the electrical frequency that is playing through the ear at that exact time, right? And in many cases, it switches from right ear to left ear, and they do something sort of similar, right? Now, what's interesting about this is, well, I can start to go, well, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line, there's a line. Suddenly, I have my golden ratio grid that I came up with, remember in that first project? You guys remember the golden ratio grid? Now, I'm not going to ask you to do any calculations, but I am asking you to find some patterns, some relationships, right? Whether it be with the overall tone or quality of the music, or maybe it's the beat, maybe it's the actual rhythm, right? Maybe there's a cowbell going quite literally in Walk and Run. Maybe, Dylan's not here today, but his song had the dun 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 dun. Now, for most of us, I think the sheet of music will be a lot easier to look at. In fact, let's take a look at it. So thank goodness that we have Miro and we have y'all's research, because today I need Walk Don't Run, and I remember the sheet music was found. Now if I could just remember where that piece was. Is it this one? Sweet. So let's go ahead and take a look at that sheet music. Now, do I necessarily need the whole thing for the grid? No, right? In fact, I could just end up taking one line. And I could find a grid technically from also this piece. So for, the harp, I'm thinking, yes, you'll probably have to use the wave file. However, if you have sheet music, not necessarily. Could you use both? I'll let that be up to you, because, well, that would be rather difficult to match all these different variables and qualities about your piece. However, it would make quite the complex, interesting drawing. So let's make another 12 by 18 file and place embedded. Again, this is something that honestly, once I got it on a 12 by 18, well, I could just print it out and trace on it using the overlay method myself. So again, what I'm trying to say, guys, is Photoshop is not required for this next piece, but I chose to use it to at least show you, right? Because, well, first, no matter what, the diagram needs to be 12 by 12 or 12 by 18. So I might as well use Photoshop to get something out of the way, whether it be to find that Audacity wave file, or if I just trying to reposition some of the note qualities about this, right? So let's say I wanted to continue in Photoshop, and I wanted to create some lines, right? So there is a line tool. However, I find that it can be a bit hard to use, to be honest. But let's go ahead and try it out. Right, so of course at the end right here, you may have a different tool by default, like say rectangle, right? Of course, right click and hold and click on line tool. And essentially if I hold shift, I can get some pretty interesting results in terms of making some lines. Now, as you can see, this is where things get a little complicated because, well, I find it a lot easier to do more things at once. So in my demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and select the whole thing. I'm going to go ahead and make some lines for myself. So you'll notice that I pull out the ruler lines. So if you don't have the ruler, you can do Command R or Control R and bring up your ruler. And quite simply just make those lines really quick. What I'm looking for is kind of the interesting rhythm that's found in the rhythm. So let's test it out first. You can kind of tell, who has this song again? Do you hear it? Da 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 da. Right? Anyway, it's in there. Maybe I just get that piece. So don't get me wrong, there are advantages to doing it digitally. Let's face it. I mean, that took me seconds when if on the drafting table, yeah, if I had everything set up and the tape dots down and everything ready to go and I got all my pins, yeah, that could also go equally as fast. But again, let's face it, digital architecture is approaching. That's pretty interesting though. A little separation in there. It's definitely some smaller spaces versus larger spaces. And we'll end it right there. Even if I wanted to move them, I could move them as well, but you actually have to change tools, and then of course can move it. And get that last one. But interesting enough, we have this unique rhythm that literally derives from the music itself. Now, that's really hard to look at, and let's face it, in fact, as soon as this goes away, it's almost not apparent, right? There's almost nothing there. However, what if I started to revisualize it, right? Now that I have these grid lines, when I select something, it'll actually lock into place. So if I hold shift, maybe I decide to make something of it. Now again, I do not want you to do this one for the instrument. Please do not use Photoshop or any digital tools for the instrument. However, for the song, again, you're kind of welcome to do either or, digital or analog. Alright, so in my case, I'm just selecting some of the inner spaces of those notes, right? And maybe there's something about them. I'm going to go ahead and brush them. And I'm going to stick to my black and white grayscale kind of model, right? I'm going to make a new layer so that I can start to look at it and start to go with loudness, right? Or, you know, I'm asked, and let's take a look at, you know, what the assignment's saying again. Diagram of the sound, so grids and words. So what does that mean, words? Well, maybe it pertains to a quality of the song, right? Loud would be a quality of that song, or quiet would be a quality, right? What else would be a quality of your piece of music, guys? One word. Quick. There's a good. What about slow? Right? What about melancholy? Right? Ah, there's a $5 word. What about facetious? There's a $10 word. Right? What I am asking you is for a college word, right? That really represents your piece. And let's just go ahead and pin it down. I want to see at least 5 words in this diagram. All right, so let's take a look. How do I diagram 5 words, and how would I decide where they go? All right, well, first let's take a look at the space in between, right? I just sort of highlighted those, so I might as well show them. They don't necessarily all have to be the same. In fact, maybe there's something about the darkness of them at the bottom. You know, maybe it's a very heavy song, so I want to express some of that heaviness about it. Now, maybe at the end, it sort of has like a flaring note, right? It has a trill, is what this is called. This little, right? It's a trill, right? Which means it goes back and forth between those notes as fast as possible. That being said, well, what's a good word for that? Well, if I had to subjectively imprint it with a word, I would say interesting, fun, whimsical, right? Something quite interesting. I'm going to go with whimsical. So I'm going to go ahead and add some text, right? Of course, deselect whatever I selected. Now let's go ahead and add that, right? Obviously, it's pretty big, so let's take a look at it first and go with whimsical. Let's zoom in so you can actually see it. Hold spacebar so I can get there and pan. And it'll disappear before I can even get to it. Oh, that's why. It's in white. There we go. Whimsical. And so is that font. I'm going to go with something much more legible and a little bit bigger. I like it. It's a neat font. Now, I could just use this, you know, to kind of express what that is doing, or like I said, honestly, you could really interpretate this grid really any way. In my case, it's more about the spaces in between. What are the spaces in between the notes? Silence, right? So you may have to, don't get me wrong, this is kind of just an example of what we could do. I'm not definitely trying to do walk, don't run. In fact, I'm completely making it up, right? But again, this is how we could use this tool to perform, right? So in our case, you know, I did give a little bit of inspiration, right? Maybe it's kind of like a word diagram. Obviously, this is doing a lot. I don't expect all that, but that's some pretty good inspiration, to say the least. There's another good inspiration, right? Oh, it's a lot of parking. It's obviously trying to diagram it in a different way. But again, I just want you to use those words. However, we can get kind of interesting with them, right? Now, it won't let me transform it. Oh, I guess the new Photoshop does. Interesting. Learn something new every day. So it looks like without actually exploding, you can actually keep some of this stuff. Let's see if it'll rotate it for me though. Hey, look at that. Learn something new every day. Usually you have to explode something first in order to use it. But in this case, dang. So we can say whimsical. Can even show my music right back up, right? But overall, we're gonna have a very different diagram, right? It comes from something literally, but it is very abstract, right? Very open-ended, subjective, right? What do the grids mean? Why are they located where they are? Notice which grid components that I did get were just the nodes, right? Now, obviously, I could fill this in with 5 different more words. I can even start to think about color, right? Maybe I can't see that too well. I'm going to go ahead and flip it. Make it white. Interesting, right? Regardless, this is kind of the introduction to where it should be, right? Now, what I will say is Wednesday, your instrument diagram, I want to see that one pinned up, right? This diagram, I would like to see for Friday. Finished, right? Now, however, it would be great to see it all 4 diagrams on Wednesday. However, I know for some of us this will be very problematic. What I will say is give me your best for Wednesday. Let's see all 4 of them, right? However, I will say I'll grade them all Friday. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be quote unquote finished on Wednesday. But again, I want to see what you have. That way I can easily correct you or say this is good. Stop here. Does that make sense, guys? Obviously, we have a week dedicated to this for a good reason. Eventually, we're going to pick one and we're going to run with it. Right, just like we did in Project 1, just like we did in Project 2, right? Any questions about this process or what is needed this week? Ray, is that a hand up?
Sorry, is it all of us Monday through Wednesday?
Correct.
Okay.
I want to see all 4 diagrams.
Okay.
So of course 3 of the abstract instrument and 1 of the abstract song.
How many adjectives?
5, at least. Now don't get me wrong, I think, a lot of us could subjectively almost say every single note feels, and you could tie a word to each one. However, I'm just asking for 5. Yes, sir.
So, do you want us to have, like, if we're using the sheet music, do you also want us to have it like that, or do you just want it to have the lines and then the words?
It would be nice if there was kind of a hybrid of both. Like, even in my situation, let's face it, the sheet music's kind of getting too much attention, so I'd probably take it back a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, you could definitely use it.
And then the YouTube to MP3
Mm-hmm.
for the audio file, that's just if you don't have sheet music?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, so don't get me wrong, you could use this to find your grid, the sheet music itself. Even if you have the sheet music and you'd like to try this out instead, by all means, maybe it's kind of put together, that might be too many lines going on. But what I'm trying to say is it's very open-ended, and I'm trying to give you just some ideas, because I don't want to do this for you. I want you to have kind of a self-discovery. That, and let's face it, you all have different songs. There's no tutorial I could ever give in the world that's just going to be like, there you go, all 12 songs, figured out. So don't get me wrong, each of these songs kind of has something different about them. I'm thinking of Dorba Ashby, and it's got this dun 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 dun. It's got this whole kind of syncopated rhythm about it that Shania could really gravitate to, right? And sort of pick up on that rhythm, not only of what the harp is doing, but what the rest of everything else is doing. So keep in mind, guys, I know I had you just focus on your instrument, But remember, the song diagram is just about the song. It's no longer about the instrument. It's about that rhythm. It's about that story. Maybe, Tanya's really, she wants to kind of show in her music diagram that sort of head rolling, this dum, dum, right? And she shows it with a big line and a small line. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean about this diagram, right? So it don't get me wrong, you guys could work together on this, but let's face it, all of them could look very different from each other, is what I'm trying to say. Which is what has probably confused some students in the past. Let's face it, you kind of have your best friend next to you. What are you doing? Okay, well, I'm going to try and do that too. And definitely during the COVID years, this was an absolute mess because, well, nobody knew what they were doing. So it happens. However, for the sake of this YouTube video, anyway, this is not medical information. Anyway, great questions. Any others? Yes.
For this one, are we not really have to draw this out?
Could be.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So that's what I was saying. Even also, you might not really gravitate towards this Photoshop stuff. You might still be like, I don't like my Photoshop skills right now. So I definitely don't want to hear on Wednesday, I couldn't do it in Photoshop, sir. Well, then print it out and do it analog, right? Especially if the Photoshop wasn't working out for you. Which is why I was saying you kind of have some options with this song diagram. You could stop it right here, print it out. It's already at 12 by 18. We're good to go. I'm just going to put some trace on it and make it my own. However, if you really like digital programs and you kind of want to, test some things out, by all means. That's why I made this video, to show you that there are some qualities.
Does this one have to be like abstract too? Does it have to be?
In a way, yes.
Okay.
Right? But in a much more literal way.
Okay.
Right? Because in this instance, the grid does come from the music, point blank, objectively. Right? However, the subjective part is the words, right? And what I think of it, right?
Yeah.
You'll notice that I put a very big whimsical, and if I had another word, I could put, like testimony, and maybe it's really small, showing that I think whimsical in this note is more important than this part.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. But yes, to answer your question too, it could be all analog drawings that you show on Wednesday, but let's face it, you don't have to make this wave diagram yourself. Can you imagine? It'd be impossible. You can use the technology for what it does well, print it out, and of course use it accordingly. Good questions. Any others, guys? Know what to do? Obviously use the rest of the class period to get started, whether it be digitally or working in the studio on the drafting tables. Like I said, those instrument diagrams, the one that we have pinned up in there, those should be somewhat drafted. I'm looking at Isaac today with the kind of Frank Gehry-ness that was going on. Don't get me wrong, don't lose that quality about it. But how do you start to refine it a little bit? Maybe getting your French curve involved, and so on and so forth. Another thing to say, guys, is if you found yourself really struggling on pushing out ideas for the charrette, might not be a bad idea to put yourself through another 10 to 15 minute charrette. See if you can do it just listening to the music. Sometimes that can really help some students generate some ideas. Anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Sound good? Sweet. Let's end the recording here.